Hi everyone, welcome to Medical Debt. What can you do? We're gonna give everyone another minute to sign on and then we'll start the webinar. Hi everyone, welcome to Medical Debt. What can you do? I'm Danielle Andrews, the Program Manager at SHARE. Before the presentation begins, I'd like to tell you a bit about SHARE. SHARE is a national nonprofit that improves the lives of women affected by breast or ovarian cancer through experienced peer support, accessible education, and innovative outreach, always for free. It meets women wherever they are, and especially in medically underserved communities, with the insight of women who have been there too, creating a nationwide network where women are empowered and feel less alone. SHARE's free services include support groups, educational tools, expert-led webinars and presentations, a national helpline, online community, and survivor patient navigation. For more information, visit our website, sharecancersupport.org. All participants will be muted during the presentation. When the presenter finishes speaking, we will open up for a question and answer session. You are welcome to submit questions during the presentation through the question pane in the control panel on your screen. When asking questions, remember, the presenter is unable to give specific medical advice, so please keep your questions general in nature. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the SHARE website soon. Vivienne Duncan is a director of the Cancer Advocacy Elderlaw Project at the City Bar Justice Center. The Cancer Advocacy Project, or CAP, provides cancer patients and survivors with pro bono legal information assistance. Ms. Duncan has been a director of CAP since 2009 and has extensive experience in life planning issues. She works with private attorneys who volunteer with the project to assist CAP clients with life planning documents, health insurance appeals, and cancer-related employment discrimination. Additionally, Ms. Duncan is qualified to practice law in the United States and England and has worked at the Justice Center for 17 years. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ms. Vivienne Duncan.
Great, thank you, Danielle. And thank you to everyone who's listening. As Danielle said, I work at the City Bar Justice Center here in New York, and the Cancer Advocacy Project assists cancer patients and survivors in the areas that Danielle mentioned. And today I'll be discussing medical debt and what to do, the kind of things that you can do to try to avoid medical debt. But if you do find yourself in this position, what the kind of things that you can do to try to alleviate the situation. So what I'll be discussing today on the agenda will be what you should think about before treatment starts if you're able to. So you're preparing to negotiate, then what you're dealing with if you're dealing with hospital or doctors and other service providers. I'll say a bit towards the end about debt collections and collections agencies. That's kind of the second part of the presentation. But I'll focus primarily on what you can do at the beginning to try to cut down on the chances of this occurring. So to get started, just to let everybody know, I understand that we have some people who will be listening outside of New York State. Under federal law, hospitals cannot turn you away in the case of an emergency. If you're in an emergency situation, even if you can't pay, they have to provide you with emergency care. So if you are in a situation when you feel that this is an emergency, don't put off going to the hospital in fear that you may not be able to pay. Of course, as with many things, it's a catch-22, because then the situation is, was it really an emergency? But in most times, if you feel that the situation is urgent enough, please don't delay in getting yourself treatment. In New York State, if you go to a public hospital, then they cannot discriminate in the treatment they give you because of an inability to pay. So that's what I say up front to everybody. Now, if it's not an emergency situation, you have some time, then the thing that once you've been seen by your doctor and the decision is made that you need to have some kind of treatment, the doctor will be writing their own notes in your records. But what you should be thinking of immediately is, once you know what the doctor is planning to do, take a look at your insurance policy. If you have not been having treatment, or you're not in the course of treatment where you know if your whatever is being proposed is going to be covered, then please, before it starts, take a look at your insurance policy. Many times people will buy insurance, and because they're doing fairly routine things for most of the time, they may not have looked at the small print for some months or years. So if you know you're going to need extensive treatment, serious treatment, go to your insurance policy. If you can't find the agreement, call the insurer and ask them to send you. When these days you may actually be able to find it online. Most of the insurance companies now put all of your details online so that you can log in and take a look. Either way, make sure that you get a hold of your particular agreement with the insurer and look through it. And you need to be able to understand your plan and confirm that it will cover the proposed treatment. Many times people will just go straight ahead and start the treatment and not find out that something is not covered until after it's been done. And then that's where you can incur expenses that could have been avoided if there had been a little planning ahead of time. So make sure you understand what the plan type is. Make sure that you get an idea of what your out-of-pocket costs will be, and does it cover the proposed treatment. If you have more than one insurer, this is another area where you can find expenses coming up unexpectedly. If you have more than one medical insurer, for example, if you have private insurance and also Medicaid or Medicare, probably Medicare and private insurance, please make sure that you give that information to the doctor's office, or if you're at the hospital, then to whoever is dealing with billing there, so that they have both the insurance companies listed. There can still be a bit of a mix-up even when they have the information about both of the insurances that you may have, because sometimes the office can send the bill to the wrong insurer first. There's usually an order in which the insurance should be taken. So it could perhaps be it should be sent first to the private insurer, and then if there are parts of the coverage that they don't pay for, then whatever is left would be sent over to Medicare, or it may be vice versa. So you need to be aware of which way round it would work for you, but always make sure that your doctor's office knows if you have more than one insurer. It may, when you're preparing for the treatment, so call the insurer ahead of time. So even if it says, when you've read all of the rules for your particular policy, if you know the name of the procedure or the kind of treatment that you will be having, call the insurer and tell them exactly that. This is what my doctor says I need. This is the procedure. This is the treatment that I'll be having. Does this require pre-approval before I have that done? Make sure that your coverage is active, but make sure that the procedure will be covered. Find out if there needs to be pre-approval, and if lab work is going to be involved, which most likely it will be, will the lab work be covered? And this is another area in which people sometimes get caught. They, after reading through the policy, they see that it may say that yes, it looks as though it should cover that treatment. But what they may not have realized is that it will be covered, but as long as it's been approved. So if that step is involved, you can end up having a real fight with the insurance policy when they would otherwise have covered it, but because that step was missed, then they'll immediately write back and say we're not covering, there'll be no coverage for that. You didn't get pre-approval. Another area in which people sometimes get a surprise is because the assumption is that the treatment will be covered by, for the lab work, will be covered by whoever the doctor sends the biopsy or whatever tissue is being looked at, that it will be covered because it's being sent by your doctor who you know is within your network. But this is another thing that you should check before something happens, before you have any work done, if you can. Just make sure that the lab that is going to be looking at the lab work is in your insurance network. A lot of people find that they get bills from either labs or anesthesiologists because these are people who they just assume they're working with their doctor and it should be covered, but that's not necessarily the case. It's always better to check first. Another area that comes up quite often is if you need to have emergency treatment. Now, as I pointed out when I first started, if you need to have emergency treatment, you know that the hospitals are supposed to provide you in that kind of situation with treatment. Now, one way of avoiding problems down the road, if you can, most insurers have something in the policy saying if you do need to have emergency treatment, you need to notify them within 24 hours of being admitted. And it's very helpful because, of course, if you need emergency treatment in 24 hours after admittance, you may not be in a position to be able to be calling your insurance company. So the safest thing to do is to tell someone, if it's your spouse or an adult child, a friend, someone, that in the event that you need to go into the hospital on an emergency basis, if you're not able to notify the insurer yourself, if you're in no position to do that, have somebody on standby who knows the routine. Let them know your policy number, your details, and the telephone number for your insurance company. It will be on your card of who to notify within that 24 hours, so that at least has been done. So if you have, this is now to discussions with your surgeon, if you have very limited or no out-of-network coverage, then of course it's going to be very important to you not to use any out-of-network um, doctors or treatments if you can possibly avoid it. And if it can't be avoided, then to keep it to a minimum. So you should let your surgeon know that if this is the case, if you are anxious about trying to remain in network, because going outside that will cause you to have huge out-of-pocket costs, let your doctor know, because he or she may routinely just refer patients to colleagues who he or she is used to working with, and not particularly be thinking in terms of which insurances does my colleague take. So make sure that they understand that you're trying to stay within network, and so that at least they will have that in their mind when they're thinking about who of their colleagues they would be referring you to. And as I said, you must definitely check who any anesthesiologist and labs that you're going to be coming into contact with to make sure that they would be within your network as well. Now, once you have had the treatment and you start to receive bills from the hospital, from the doctors, keep everything together. When you get any bill, any letter, anything at all, keep it. If you can keep track of it by putting it in a binder so that it can be, whatever you receive, you will have in a binder that's it's more or less kept in the order in which you've received it. That would be ideal, because it's always easier to work through things when you can look back at it and it's in a chronological order. So if you can, keep things in order. Try not to lose anything that you receive. And again, in the same way that I pointed this out with having someone on standby to take care of emergency situation, notifying your insurer, if you can't manage this because you're in the middle of your treatment, then if you can find someone who can help and do this for you, so that when something arrives, that person can open the envelope, the bill, and look at it for you, and to keep it all organized on your behalf, that's ideal as well. So if you get bills and you look at it and think, wow, that is high, how am I even going to pay that? Then you should request an itemized bill, because what you may get is just a bill, and this is particularly with a hospital when the bills are likely to be much higher. You can request an itemized bill, because it's important that you are able to look at it and work out what it is that you're being billed for. I mean, if you, for example, the bill may not have been calculated correctly, or you may have been charged twice for a single service. And it also, having an itemized bill allows you to see whether you should have been covered for something that you're not being covered for according to the bill. So if you're able to see that and look at it alongside your insurance plan, you'll get more of an idea of whether something should be covered or not. So once you have looked through it and you've checked to make sure that everything as it is supposed to be, if you have questions, then you will obviously need to contact the insurer. So in any time that you are dealing with an insurer or with a hospital, make sure you get the person's name. Make the note of the person's name. Make a note of the date. Excuse me, I just need to take a sip of water. Sorry. Make a note of the person's name, the date, preferably the time as well. Make a note so that you have that in case you need to look back, or in case you have to have an insurer and lawyer looking back for you, so that you can trace who you've been speaking with and can mention that person's name when you're following up. If you're going to be sending anything to the insurer or to the hospital, you send anything that you're sending by certified mail, return receipt requested, because you need to have proof that you have sent whatever it is. And also, you do not want to send the original. So if for example, somebody has sent you a bill and you're referring to that bill, don't send that actual original bill back. You keep that, you make a copy of the bill, and you enclose that with whatever letter you're sending when you're disputing anything. So you keep your original and you send a copy back, unless you're dealing with something that says you have to return the original, in which case you make a copy and you keep the copy and then you return the original. What you want to avoid is sending things to the hospital or to the insurer and you have no copy of it for yourself. You'll need it to refer back to when you're dealing with whoever you're dealing with. And this is a very important one. If you cannot pay your hospital bill, please contact their financial aid office immediately. Let them know. A lot of the hospitals have procedures in place for this kind of situation, but a lot of the patients don't realize this, and the patients will just be feeling, um, of course, worried about the treatment and feeling very badly that they are now struggling financially because, of course, the concern is if I'm having trouble paying these bills, does that mean that I can't have my treatment anymore? Will the doctor still see me? The hospitals generally recognize that this is a problem, and particularly for patients who are being treated for illnesses that are very costly, of which cancer is one. The treatments can be very expensive. So please, if you get into a situation where you are struggling, contact the hospital immediately. Now, there is a law in New York, it's called the New York Hospital Financial Assistance Law. But in many um, states, there will be something that is equivalent to this, which basically means that if you're below a certain income level, you will still be able to have treatment, and your treatment can't be charged at a higher rate than somebody who's on a managed care plan. And a key part of the laws that are there to help patients is to say that there is financial assistance available. So if your hospital has a financial assistance program, you need to find out about that immediately that you start struggling. And in many situations, that the financial plan, they have people who, in their financial office, who can help you with working out, for example, a payment plan. In order to do that, you may have to show them your income, if you're on a pension or if you're employed. You may have to show them wage slips. You may have to show them the amount of money that you receive for Social Security to give them some idea of this is why you're struggling. For the most part, hospitals are willing to work out some kind of financial plan, but the key sticking point is, are patients willing to let the doctors know? If you're worried about that, definitely social workers who are working in the hospital and the patient navigators, speak to them first if you're nervous about speaking to your doctor or the surgeon. But please tell somebody because there are procedures in place. So this is just an overview for HFAL. It just says for a one-person household to be eligible, you can have up to $36,420 per year or $3,035 per month. And that's this year for 2018. And for two-person, it's $49,380 or $4,115 per month in a household. So this is an idea of how to apply, and in other states it may be different, but it should be something at least similar to this. Someone within the hospital should be able to advise you about this. So if you're not offered, if you're struggling, once you've let someone know that you're struggling, If it's not, if financial assistance is not offered to you, then ask about it. And if you're in New York, then you ask how you can apply because you know that it should be there. And also under HFAL, in any case, if you need help to complete the form requesting this assistance, then somebody at the hospital should be there, probably within the financial assistance office, who can help you with that. And hospitals under HFAL must allow the patients to pay in installments. And under HFAL, you cannot be required to pay more than 10% of your gross monthly income with each installment. If you're not eligible for HFAL, and this could be the possibility if you're, for example, if you've had treatment in a hospital, but your doctor is not employed by the hospital, then HFAL doesn't apply to your doctor. So if your doctor is a hospital employee, he or she would be covered under HFAL, as well as any services that the hospital provides to you. If your doctor has privileges at a hospital but is not employed by the hospital, then your doctor is not covered under HFAL. So in that situation, what you'll be doing is try to negotiate to reduce the amount that you owe, or to get more time to pay. So if you're dealing with a hospital who is under HFAL, and so their policy is more straightforward because you know that you're supposed to get certain help, you know that you should be given the option to pay by installments. So if the hospital part should be being taken care of. If your doctor is not under HFAL, then if you have received assistance, HFAL type assistance, so financial assistance from the hospital, and you're dealing with your doctor who is not part of that, then you should let him or her know that the hospital is helping you in this way. So that way the doctor knows that your situation is such and has been approved according to the hospital to be such that you do need help. It's another way of helping the doctor to see that you do need this kind of help. And as I said before, you should be prepared to show proof of income, expenses, possibly savings, just verifying that you do need to have this kind of assistance. So if you're having problems, you tell your doctor that you're having problems and ask for a discount. So that is a possibility, and particularly if your doctor has been treating you for a while and they know you, it's entirely possible that they can agree to put the bill down somewhat. So if, as the saying goes, if you don't ask, you don't get. So please do ask. If you're receiving the financial aid from the hospital, then you can actually take that there, show that to the doctor and see if he or she will reduce their bill too. You can ask about paying in monthly installments, and if that is agreed, please be sure to get the installment plan agreement in writing so that everybody is clear about what the terms are. So that's the general overview of the things that you should be doing. Sometimes people are concerned about dealing with accumulating a large debt because they're very fearful of what will happen in future. Suppose they can't pay off all of the debts that have accumulated, which of course with medical treatment can be substantial. So people will often say to me when I give presentations, well, does that mean that the hospital can go after my daughter? If I can't pay all of this off in my lifetime because I owe so much money, will they go after my daughter? And the answer is, it depends. If with medical debt, if you owe money and you can't pay it all off, the debt is supposed to go towards your estate. It is not to go to your child, your adult child. But if you own property with that person, then what somebody who you owe money to can do is to try to claim it through your estate. So in that situation, if you are a joint owner of, for example, a home with, for example, your daughter, what they can do is to try and get the money that way, to put what is called a lien on the property and to try to get that back that way. So this is something that I do get asked sometimes. So, but for the most part, if you are not a joint owner of any kind of property with anyone else, and I'll put in a caveat here because a spouse can be different, but if you don't own joint property with an adult child or a sibling or anyone else, then if you do have outstanding medical debts, um, they can only go after your estate. They cannot say to your adult son or daughter, well, you have to pay your mother or your father's um, medical debt. Okay, so I just wanted to make that clear. I'll just make brief mention now of like an overview of what happens if you do incur debt with the debt collection agencies. You do have federally, so for the whole of the US, there are protections in place under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, and it kind of prevents debt collectors from harassing you. Let me first point out that your original creditor in this kind of situation would be the hospital or your doctor. Those are the people who have provided the service directly to you. So ideally, after speaking with your doctors, with the hospital, the the situation would have been sorted out by you being allowed to either have reduced hospital, the reduced bills um, sent to you, or I should say, and or hopefully they'll reduce some of the amount, but also that you'll have been permitted to pay in installments. If none of that has worked and the hospital and or the doctor has been billing you for a while and you've not been able to pay and nothing has been worked out, then after a few months, it generally tends to be about 6 to 9 months, they can send the medical bills if they choose to do so. They can sell it to a third party debt collector, which is what most people know about when they think of debt collectors. At which point your original creditor, the doctor or the hospital, is no longer in that picture. The debt now belongs to a third party debt collection agency. So my hope is that given the first part of my presentation, and that most of you, if not all of you, will have been able to sort something out between you, the hospital, and or the doctors. And generally, that should be feasible, because with the many presentations that I have done, many of which have taken place within hospitals, most hospitals that I've been to, in fact, probably all of them, it's just that we haven't had that discussion, will have that debt collection or the debt issue in mind, and will have a dedicated office within the hospital that deals with um, billing and financial assistance. There is one hospital that I went to most recently that has provided, which is now instituted within their financial assistance system, that you can actually call ahead once you know what treatment is going to be prescribed for you, what the treatment plan is, and you can discuss with that office how much this is likely to cost, how much is this all likely to come to, so that you're not doing this in a huge void. They also have a line that you can call where you can discuss, what is on offer to me, what can I do to reduce or um, to pay in installments. So they've got two dedicated lines, one that you can call ahead of time so that you kind of have an idea of what you're looking at, and they include information about, what your co-pays are likely to be, if there's going to be any co-insurance, so that you get a really great picture of what is ahead of you with that treatment that is being proposed. And then the second line is more to do with what I was just discussing with this financial assistance. What can you do? How much can any of this be reduced? Okay, how do I take care of the rest? So please explore that route first. If not, in the first instance with the actual doctor or surgeon, then certainly with the patient navigators or with the social workers. This final part of the presentation is really like a last resort. If you do end up in this position and dealing with debt collectors, you do have protections, as I say. At the very least, you've got the federal system that is helping, so that you should not be threatened, you should not be harassed. In New York, they have, in addition to that, protections that as you can see on screen here, there's a 6-year statutory limit, which means that if there's been no action, no attempts to contact you about your bill for 6 years, then the statute of limitations means that bill, that debt has died. So be aware that you should be, in New York State, you should be aware that if you've received no billing, no communications about a debt, nothing, for 6 years or more, then that debt by law has died, and somebody cannot come back after 7 years and say, oh, now we want to collect on this debt. If you have a settlement agreement with a third-party debt collector, remember this is no longer your doctor or hospital, then they have to put that in writing. If you prefer to be contacted by email, then you can specify that. So there are these rules, as you see, that they have to follow. So be aware, if you are in New York State and you are in this situation, you do have these additional protections. You also, wherever you are, have the right to dispute a bill from a debt collector. And if you do find that, for example, maybe you're saying, no, I should not have been charged that amount, or I never had a medical bill, I think this must be mistaken identity. Whatever reason, you respond to the debt collector and let them know that you're going to challenge that bill. So there are steps that you would be able to take, but the key thing is to let them know that you are challenging the bill and request that they take no action while that's being done. So if there's something that actually, someone else, for example, it should be paid by Medicare, and you need to now get in touch with Medicare and find out why it was not paid, you let the debt collector know that you're looking into it, so that they don't just send this off to court. So you keep everybody in the loop about what's going on, and anything that you're sending to anyone, you do it by certified mail, return receipt requested, so that you have proof. Another option that you have, if you're being harassed by a debt collector, which, as I said, should not happen, but it does, you can send a cease and desist letter, which basically tells the third-party debt collector to stop contacting you. And once they've received that, which you will know if they have, because they will have to sign for it, because you will have sent it by certified mail, you should receive the green card back from the return receipt. And that's proof, so that you know they've received it. And the only time they can contact you after they've received that is if they intend to take the case to court. Please, whenever you're dealing with medical debt, and particularly if somebody is sending you a lot of bills and haven't been responding, you need to make sure that you or somebody else will be opening your mail, because if you receive a summons, which is would let you know that the case has gone to court, and you don't respond, it means that that debt collector can take your case to the court, and if you have not responded, they can get an automatic judgment against you. It's called a default judgment. You don't want that to happen, because if that does, they have access to your bank account. So these are some of the defenses that you'd have if you haven't been properly billed. The insurance should have paid, but they didn't. You're low income and you weren't offered financial aid, um, or you never received a bill. So those are things that typically happen in this situation. You can contest the default judgment. My advice to you there is that you would contact a lawyer. There are organizations, I would think in most states, certainly in New York State, where there are people who can provide free legal services if you are below a certain income, and can help you to respond to a default judgment so that they can cancel that and you would have access to your bank account again. So it's an order to show cause which would need to be served, but if it comes to that, please contact a legal organization of some point, and someone will be able to help you through that process. This is just pointing out what can happen with frozen bank accounts. If they do get a judgment against you, then you need to act quickly, because they can freeze up to twice the amount that they are saying that you owe. And in New York, if you have less $2,750 or less in your account, they cannot freeze your account. So if that is done, if it gets frozen, you have an automatic right to have that your bank account unfrozen. So this is just some more about, so if there are no government benefits, so this is just giving the limits of what you can have in your bank account. But if you have a relatively small amount in your bank account, and particularly if all of your income is from, for example, Social Security or disability benefits, unemployment benefits, your funds are exempt from being frozen, and the debtor has no right to do that. And if they do freeze it, you have a right to get that unfrozen. So you'd probably benefit from the help of someone in a legal organization who can get that done for you quite quickly. This is just a brief word on if you are working. Again, if your weekly income after taxes is below $390, then they cannot take money from your wages. If it is above that, then somebody who's got a judgment against you can take some of your money. All right. So if you're in that position, get in touch with an attorney. So at the you'll find, because I know you'll have access to a copy of this PowerPoint. At the end here is just some information about if you do find yourself in this position, these are the resources that can help you. If you're being harassed, there's information here that can be for nationwide numbers and also numbers for New York State places. So you should be able to find help here, depending on what the situation is. The Department of Consumer Affairs, for whichever state you are in, is very helpful if you need to make a complaint about bad behavior by debt collectors. And same thing with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And that's it. So it was a lot of information, but if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Hi, everyone. We're going to start the question and answer session. If you have any questions, please be sure to put it in the question panel in the question pane in your control panel. So the first question that was written to us is, I am currently in treatment and my mortgage payments are becoming too expensive. Is there a way that I can lower my mortgage payments, especially since I barely avoided foreclosure?
Oh heavens, yeah, that's a completely different area of law to what I do. I'm not sure. There's actually is the person in New York City? Do you know?
I'm not sure if they're in New York City.
Okay. If the person is in New York City, I know that there are legal services organizations that if wherever the person is, they are able to find a legal services organization that deals with foreclosure prevention, that would be the ideal place to find out whether the mortgage payments could be reduced. That's a whole different area, but foreclosure prevention, that's a key area in what they do.
Okay. Okay. So the next question we have is, will unpaid medical debt lower your credit score?
Quite possibly, yes. It could do. Um, it's it can be added to um, the overall financial picture of the patient. Yes, it can end up on as yeah, it could end up being on the credit part of the credit rating. Yeah.
So another question we have, if I can't afford to pay for my treatment, are there any other options for me?
Uh, well, um, it's there are some. I'm just trying to think how to put this. There are some parts of treatment that you can get assistance with. So, for example, a part of the treatment may be that you have to have certain medications, which are expensive. Some of the pharmaceutical companies have programs in which they can, if somebody is struggling or low income or financially struggling, they can provide. They have programs that they can provide that medication that the person needs, either free or much lower cost. So if part of the problem is that your medication is very costly, it might be worth contacting whoever the pharmaceutical company is that provides that medication and see whether they have a program that can help in that regard. With respect to like a treatment plan, something that is more you're having treatment at the hospital, and so of course it's building up. That is essentially part of what I was talking about with the negotiation. The key thing is if you're struggling with the treatment, whether it's you're still having treatment in a hospital setting, and so you're dealing with the surgeons, or you've now transitioned and you're more dealing with one particular doctor and it's more outpatient visit, maybe in their doctor's office. Whoever you're dealing with, the key thing is to speak to that person and find out, because they may be willing to put the fees that they're charging, the cost, to reduce it. You don't know what they're willing to do unless you tell them. And a lot of people feel so badly that they don't say anything, so they don't know what the options are. But there isn't, aside from finding foundations and um, you know, as I said, the programs that come through the pharmaceutical companies, it's very difficult to find a way because medical treatment is just inherently expensive. If you're not eligible for Medicaid, because that's another option, if you are eligible for Medicaid, that can help a lot because they will pick up a lot of the other costs that, for example, Medicare won't pay for, because that's a whole 20% that is left to you out of pocket if you're on Medicare. So it kind of depends on the person's age. It depends on the person's financial circumstances, whether they would be eligible for, Medicaid, which would certainly help. But it's so individual that it's difficult to know. It's difficult to know. Um, I think what might be helpful is we have a like another CAP guide that deals with financial and medical resources. And I'm just thinking that might be something, if I provide it to you, would you be able to make that available to the people who are here?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can do that after the presentation.
Yeah, no problem. I can definitely send that out.
Okay.
So another question we have is, how can I recover from medical bankruptcy?
You already filed. So do you know if the person has actually filed for bankruptcy?
Yeah, they
Or
filed for bankruptcy from their first breast cancer diagnosis. The
and
treatment
to
based on that.
right. I think what might be helpful, because that, again, that is another area. Essentially, what it means is you have to build up your credit little by little again. Um, and it can be difficult because once you file for bankruptcy, then of course what you're looking at is, um, credit cards being, or not wanting to give you, regular credit cards. You have to have these ones that have maybe start off having like a high interest payment. But that essentially is the only way to get back on the field again. That you have to reestablish your credit, um, by building it back up. I don't know whether the person. It might be worth speaking to someone who has. Um, who I'm just trying to think. It's difficult to know because if it's in New York, the New York City has an a bureau that you can contact, which can help with reestablishing, or I should say, it's like financial wellness. It's that sort of thing where it kind of helps you to rebuild, or if it's not a case of having filed for bankruptcy, to try and avoid bankruptcy. It's like a financial workshop, which is helpful. Um, is it okay for me to give a New York thing? It's difficult to know because if the person's outside of New York, all I can say is the equivalent that you're looking for is going to be what I'm going to say now. There are there are legal organizations that deal with bankruptcy. They usually have an element to them where it has like this financial counseling side. It might be worth contacting wherever you are, um, a legal services organization that deals with bankruptcy, and ask them if they can recommend you to somebody who deals with financial counseling. Explain that you've been through bankruptcy and now you want to reestablish your credit, and they, because of the areas that they work in, should have those kind of contacts that would be able to help you to reestablish your credit rating. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good. So we have a few questions that are in reference to the Affordable Care Act and
Yeah.
deductibles, and if there's a way to lower their cost of the insurance. For many, it
Um,
says they're small business owners and they have kids in college, and their deductible is just becoming too expensive.
yeah. Unfortunately, the only option, because the payments are what they are, the 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 only way that you can try to navigate it, and again, depending on which state you're in, some states have very few options, as far as the Affordable Care Act, but some of them have more. So in all areas, whichever state you're in, there should be, an office, at least one office, that is dedicated to going through all of the options that are in your area, all of the options that are in that state, um, to find out which one is the most optimal. If you have a certain condition and you need to have certain medications, they will look at all of that, plug in all of the information, and come up with which is the best, combination with respect to, um, treatments that will be covered, the cost of the medications that you would need to be having, and the cost of each premium. Do you feel that you could more manage, something that has smaller premiums, but the downside to that is it's likely that deductibles are going to be higher, um, and any other, you're going to have to shell out more at the beginning before the insurance kicks in, but that's why the premiums are lower. So it's a balancing act, and the premiums, I'm hoping, because the premiums went up more for some people this year, they're now speculating to some degree that for the next round that comes up next year, it should be lower because everybody is a little nervous, the insurance companies, about the changes for this year. So everyone seemed to have decided to put the premiums up, but things have remained fairly stable, and so the feeling is that they will go down a little. I'm hoping that's not wishful thinking, but the most I can advise is see wherever you are, whichever state you're in, contact whoever is in charge of, and again, it depends on whether the person is part of the Affordable Care Act or if they get private insurance. But if it's through the Affordable Care Act and you're in New York, they have New York State of Health. That's the one that takes care of that in New York, and they have offices and navigators who can take you through the system and find out which option works best for you. Okay, and each state has their version of New York State of Health.
Okay.
Okay.
So this is just someone brought this up to our attention. It's in reference to it's not a question, but it's in reference to the medical bankruptcy. They said that the Susan Komen and the American Cancer Society has financial assistance program that may be able to help individuals who had a cancer diagnosis and now are struggling to make their monthly payments.
Oh, good to know. Good to know. I'll have to put them in my little guide. That's good to know. In fact, when I have a look when I do provide the guide, have a look in there and see if any of the organizations that are listed may help. Sometimes there are charities and foundations that are willing to make like I wouldn't say stipends, but give a little payment. It's many of them will do perhaps maybe a small one-off payment, but because there's so much demand on resources, it can be difficult to get ongoing payment for any, for whatever it is, whether it's your medications or um, sometimes it's even help with food. Um, so it's important to try to find out from whoever you contact how, if this is going to be a one-off, if this is something that is going to be ongoing indefinitely. As I said, when we were having the guide put together, it was very clear that resources were very stretched. And when we went back recently to look at the guide and make sure everything was up to date, some of the organizations that had been there when the guide was first produced, I believe about 3 or 4 years ago, had completely disappeared. So if Komen is doing something because they're well established, that should have more longevity than some of the smaller foundations and groups that were trying to assist at that a few years ago. But it's tough. The costs are huge.
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to thank Ms. Vivienne Duncan for an informative program, and thanks to all of you for participating. Please take a moment to fill out the survey at the end of the webinar, and it may take a few minutes for the survey to download. Thank you again, Ms. Duncan. It was a great program.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening.